I was driving home after an exhausting shift at work. It was close to midnight. Normally I'd take the train into the city. It's a long drive, but I already knew I'd be staying past the train's operating hours. I was completely wiped out, not just from work, but because I was well past my usual bedtime. Once I left the city and was coasting down the long, dark rural highways, staying awake became a real challenge. I didn't feel like I was going to fall asleep, but it felt like mental torture to keep my eyes open. 40 minutes passed, and I'd only passed a few cars before something odd caught my attention on the side of the road. It was a pickup truck, parked on the grass, no lights on, no one inside or nearby. Kind of strange out here in the middle of nowhere. But I figured maybe the driver ran out of gas or had engine trouble and already got a ride home. I didn't give it much thought until, just 2 minutes later, I passed another vehicle. This time it was a car, but similarly abandoned, pulled off the road with no lights and no one around. I'd driven this stretch dozens of times and never seen anything like that. It grabbed my attention and kept me a bit more alert. Another few minutes passed. I was zoning out when something suddenly appeared in my headlights right on the road. I didn't even have time to register what it was. My right tire slammed into it before I could react. It stunned me, just how sudden it happened. I kept driving, listening carefully for any unusual sounds. Sure enough, within a minute I knew something was wrong. I didn't need the dashboard light to know my tire was going flat. I pulled over and instantly thought about the abandoned vehicles I'd just passed. It felt too strange to be coincidence. The only difference was that I was still in my car, and whoever was in those wasn't. I threw the car in park, sighed, and stepped out to inspect the damage. I was so tired I couldn't even get angry, just worn down and frustrated. I walked to the passenger side and checked the tire. Scratches covered the paint around the wheel, and the tire was nearly flat. I knew I'd need a tow. Before heading back inside, I looked around. The road was deserted, nothing but forest on either side. It was one of those moments when the quiet felt too quiet. That eerie silence was just settling in when I saw movement. Far ahead, someone was walking along the edge of the road. I couldn't make out much because of the darkness and the fact they were keeping close to the tree line. It almost looked like they were trying to avoid being seen. My first thought was that it might be someone from one of those abandoned cars. But as they got closer, a heavy unease hit me. I jumped back into the car and called for a tow. A minute passed, the figure drew closer, leaving the trees and walking right up to my car. They didn't speak. Their movements were jittery, off in a way I can't explain. Then they looked directly at me. The moment our eyes met, something in me screamed to get out of there. I threw the car into drive and pulled away, even though I knew I could be ruining the wheel. 20 seconds down the road, I passed another car, but this one was different. Its driver's side door was half open, and the interior lights were still on. I had no doubt that's where that man had come from. I didn't stop. I drove straight into the next town and got help with the tire. The whole situation felt surreal. I chalked it up to a strange night and moved on until 4 days later. That's when I read the news. 2 people had gone missing along that very road I take to work. My stomach dropped. I looked into it further. Same night, same road, same locations. The 2 vehicles I passed belonged to them. Police found that both of their tires had been punctured by something intentionally placed in the road, presumably to force them to stop. I contacted the authorities and gave them everything I could remember, but as far as I know, nothing came of it. Neither person has been found. No suspects, no leads, and the thought that still lingers, how close I came to being the third. I was working for DoorDash that night. It was my main source of income, so I usually tried to clock in around 8 to 9 hours every day. The problem was, I was terrible at staying on schedule. My start times kept slipping later and later, until some nights I wouldn't even leave the house until 9 or 10 p.m. That particular night followed the same pattern. I was about 3 hours into my shift when I got a new order. It was just past 1 a.m. The request came in for a grocery pickup at a gas station. Convenience store not far from where I was. The station looked deserted when I arrived. I went in, grabbed the order. It was just one big, cheap bottle of wine and walked back out to my car. I double-checked the receipt. Yep, that's all they wanted. Kinda strange, but nothing shocking. The annoying part was that it was alcohol, which meant I couldn't just drop it off. I had to verify someone's ID at the door. I plugged in the address and started driving. It was about 15 minutes away, tucked deep in a heavily wooded area. Not unusual for this town. Half the neighborhoods were surrounded by forest, But when I pulled onto the driveway, something felt off. The road was uneven and poorly kept, more like a dirt trail than a driveway. The house was set far back and looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in years. No lights on, no cars, just the faint glow of my headlights illuminating the weathered porch and part of the front wall. I parked the car and stepped out. The woods were deathly still. That kind of quiet where even the smallest sound, your foot on gravel, the click of your door seems amplified. At that hour it felt like I was the only living soul out there. I pulled up the DoorDash app to prepare for ID verification. Then I noticed something strange off to the side. Deep in the trees, there was a light, a small, faint glow. At first, I thought it was just another house, maybe a porch light shining through the branches. But I couldn't see a structure, just the light itself hanging in the dark. Trying to ignore it, I made my way up the porch steps. There was no doorbell, so I knocked 3 quick raps that echoed inside like the place was empty. Still, I waited. My car's headlights cast long shadows across the porch and part of the interior. The inside of the house was pitch black. No hallway light, no faint lamp, nothing. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. Finally, after about a minute, I heard movement, footsteps. Then the door opened slowly. A man stood there, partially silhouetted by the faint glow from my car. He was tall and slender, and his face was hidden in the shadows. I told him I needed to see his ID to hand over the alcohol. He nodded slightly and rasped, "Hold on, I'll grab it." His voice was low and strained, barely more than a whisper. Turned around and walked into the darkness, not bothering to flip on a light. He left the door open behind him. I stood there, waiting on the porch, feeling exposed. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the trees. Something about this just didn't sit right. I glanced back at my car, then toward the woods where I'd seen the light earlier. That glow was still there, but now it was closer, much closer. It wasn't a porch light at all. It was moving at that moment. It became clear it was a handheld light, like someone was out there walking around, slowly, quietly, watching, and they were coming my way. Goosebumps spread across my arms as I turned my head back toward the open door. I could hear something again, wood creaking from inside the house. Not fast, slow and deliberate. Footsteps. Something in my gut screamed that I needed to leave. Now, without another second of thought, I turned and sprinted back to my car. As I ran, I saw the light in the woods shift slightly, almost like whoever was holding it reacted to my movement. I didn't look back again. I jumped in, slammed the door shut, fired up the engine, and peeled out of that driveway like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I didn't stop driving until I made it back to the gas station where I'd picked up the order. I parked under the floodlights and just sat there, trying to calm my nerves and make sense of what happened. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it, the guy, the dark house, the person or thing in the woods. I finally broke down and did some research, hoping to find something that would help me understand or at least help me move on. What I found only made it worse. That address didn't belong to an active residence. The property had been abandoned for over 50 years, the stretch of forest surrounding it, completely empty. No houses for nearly half a mile in any direction. There's no logical reason someone should have been out there. No explanation for the man in the doorway, or the light moving through the trees. I don't know what was waiting for me that night, but I do know this sigh wasn't meant to be there. And whatever I walked away from, it's something I'll never forget. Back in 2019, I traveled to my cousin Zach's cabin to watch over his dog while he was out of town for a short work trip. He was only going to be gone for 3 days, but didn't want to leave his dog Max with a stranger. I called it a cabin, but truthfully, it was more like a full-sized house tucked deep into the woods. The term cabin just fit the vibe, surrounded by nothing but trees. I spent the first day catching up with Zach until he left around mid-afternoon. There wasn't much to do there, just a peaceful place to unwind, maybe put on some music by the fireplace. That evening, after dinner, I decided to enjoy the sunset outside by a small campfire. I took Max with me, and we sat quietly in the backyard as the sunlight slowly dipped below the trees. For a while, it was peaceful, but once the sun disappeared, the mood changed instantly. The darkness wrapped around the house like a blanket, and everything grew painfully quiet. It wasn't relaxing anymore, it was unsettling. Within 10 minutes, I smothered the fire and took Max back inside. Something about being out in the woods after dark gave me the creeps. I flopped onto the couch with Max and put on a horror movie, trying to shake that eerie feeling. The long drive earlier had worn me out, and I kept dozing off throughout the film. At one point, I woke up and noticed Max wasn't lying next to me anymore. I looked around and spotted him sitting rigidly at the front door. I called out, "Max." But the way he was positioned made me uneasy. He wasn't just relaxing, he was upright, alert, staring directly at the door like he was expecting something. When I called his name again, he turned to glance at me briefly, then turned right back to the door. I got up and patted him on the side, then peeked through the peephole. Nothing. I cracked the door open just enough to look around. The woods were pitch black, and there was no movement, no sounds, nothing. I closed the door and tried to reassure myself it was probably a deer or some other animal passing through. Max was a sharp German Shepherd mix, after all, so I didn't doubt his senses. Still, I didn't think it was anything serious. I finished the movie and went to bed not long after. The next morning was peaceful. I made coffee, sat outside with Max, and just soaked in the quiet. I considered going for a walk, but didn't want to risk getting lost, so I stayed close to the house as evening arrived. I followed the same routine as the night before, headed inside, lounged on the couch, and put on a movie. Max laid with me for a bit before wandering the house, probably out of boredom. Then, out of nowhere, I heard him barking loud and aggressive from behind me. Startled, I jumped up and ran toward the kitchen where the noise was coming from. Max was standing stiff, tail tucked, hackles raised, growling and barking at seemingly nothing. I tried to soothe him, speaking softly, but even when he stopped barking, he kept growling in that low, tense way dogs do when something's really wrong. The kitchen was empty. The only window in there was too high for Max to see through, so whatever he was reacting to wasn't visible. I brought him back to the living room, hoping he'd settle down again, but right as I got him calmed, we both heard three faint but clear tapping sounds coming from the kitchen we had just left. Max leaped up and started barking again. This time, I didn't tell him to stop. I was genuinely unnerved. I went back to the kitchen and looked around. Still no one. The sound had been like someone tapping on a hollow surface outside the window. I stepped closer to the window and looked out, squinting through the shadows. Nothing, no movement, no sign of life. My mind raced. Was it a raccoon or just normal cabin noises amplified by isolation? But Max's reaction told me otherwise. He wasn't just spooked, he was alert, tense, ready for something. Trying to stay calm, I decided to move to the bedroom. There was a small TV in there, and I figured we might both feel safer behind a closed door. Max laid on the bed beside me, ears perked, staying alert the entire time. Even as I turned off the lights and got ready for bed around 11 p.m., he stayed right by my side. I shut the bedroom door, refilled Max's water bowl, and jumped in the shower. Despite the unsettling moments, I was still trying to enjoy my time there, but halfway through rinsing off, there were several sudden thuds against the wall. Then Max's barking erupted again. I shut the water off, threw on my clothes, and rushed into the bedroom. The door was wide open. Max was gone. I heard his barks echoing from further inside the house. I ran through the hallway and froze when I saw the front door wide open. Max was outside, barking into the forest stand. Then he took off without thinking. I grabbed a flashlight from the closet and bolted after him into the woods. The further I went, the quieter everything became. Soon I couldn't hear Max at all, just the breeze rustling the trees. Max, Max, I kept shouting into the dark, hoping he'd come back. After what felt like an eternity, maybe 5 minutes, I finally heard leaves rustling ahead. Max came bounding toward me out of the darkness, tail tucked, whimpering, his eyes full of panic. He stopped and turned around to stare into the trees, like he was still afraid of what he'd seen. We sprinted back to the cabin, locked the doors, and called 911. I also called Zach to let him know what happened. The police came by, but there wasn't much they could do. We packed up and spent the night in a nearby hotel until Zach returned the next day. The police said it was likely someone had been watching the cabin for a while and might have broken in, only to be scared off by Max before they could do anything worse. To this day, I don't know what was lurking out there, or what Max saw, but I'm certain that dog saved me that night. Now, more than 6 years later, Max is getting older. He's almost 10, but every time I visit Zach, I make sure to give that dog a hug and a treat. He may not be mine, but I love him like family, and I'll never forget how he protected me from something or someone in those dark woods.